Hello, everybody. My name is Ray LC from the City University of Hong Kong. And today I wanted to talk to folks about the way that performers interact and express themselves during distance performance paradigm. So during COVID and also coming out of COVID. So this is presented here at CSCW, but it also was presented more as an art performance before at IEEE VSAP, and then also with the New York Hall of Science previously. Just very quickly, I wanted to tell you about our studio. So we're the studio for narrative spaces. So we study contextual storytelling, and in particular, we study human-machine interactions and technology interactions in these spatial contexts. And we use both speculative, experiential, and experimental approaches to study that. So on one side, we study robots and gestures, and on the other side, we study those types of interactions in spaces and how they're influenced by those spaces. So in this work, what we started with was this interest in the way that performers seems to be adapting to the technology that was happening during COVID, basically. When performers were canceled and people were forced to either do online performances or at sometimes just like literally end their careers, right? So there are asynchronous performances happening at that time, but what the performers felt like was that there was this kind of limited perspective, because oftentimes, because of the asynchronous model, people were doing multiple takes, and therefore the performances were not live as it should be. So they also mentioned that because of these limitations, for example, of Zoom or other types of platforms, they can't show a whole range of movements so that the cameras can pick up the entire movements when they're in places where the camera cannot see them. And really, it's more of this kind of less interaction with the audience, because you don't really get to see the audience like in the classical stage where, the clapping and small noises can be heard all the time. But the online performance basically also has some advantages. For example, it lets performers control like the scenery, control the context. And they also kind of work like a director, because that camera can be only where you want them to see, where you want the audience to see. Because in the stage performance, the audience can actually see everything. These new constraints are actually a source of inspiration, actually, in some cases. So one of the things that we saw in this is also that they use this metaphor of like time delay. They saw that there was this kind of deferral in the real life where the performances would be kind of be canceled or like, move to a much later date, for example. And in some sense, they equate this kind of live performance as a sense of timelessness. And the online performance also has a delay, and this delay kind of both the technological delay from where we are to where the performer is to where the audience can perceive it, and also how their lives have been altered. So it's kind of this like macro and micro level of this delay or deferral. In these performances, there's actually a lot of lack of feedback. So as the performers told us, over 20 performers that we interviewed, they discussed this, limitations such as these multitasking type phenomena, where in the online venue, because of things like Zoom, where you kind of see all kinds of stuff happening with people's video on, etc., they're often unaware of all this distraction, but they also have to handle them in these kind of unique ways. That's really different from the live performance. Also on the online version, the improvisation doesn't really work well, because the whole production, if you have a stage performance, you have this kind of unpredictable nature, and the audience is for us to react to. So in this like kind of live streaming format, people are forced to kind of refocus in this online format as well. So analogous to the offline manner, but also different in its own way because of the technology that's being involved, and kind of being constantly distracted. But of course, the good thing, the interesting that we found is actually all this distraction and unpredictableness and all these kind of potentially negative things actually leads to these contradictions that leads the performers to have to improvise around it. So it's sort of like this improvisation around the technology. One interesting area that we really looked at was this idea of like connection and community. So because of this lack of physical touch that's in these kind of distance formats, they use different types of strategies. So for example, they use like the rhythm of the online kind of audience as a way to kind of tell the story of touch in some ways, right? They use emojis, etc. I mean, the online rehearsals actually is oftentimes is very difficult for the actors to actually like imagine what's happening in other spaces, because there's like these whole 360 3D information that it's missing in some sense, and so that's another challenge to overcome. And then of course there's also this mask wearing mandate initially, and so again, this whole idea of like contradictions forces to look in the positive adaptation. This is also something that they do, is they just imagine everybody smiling, if they're wearing masks, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of opportunity, and also in terms of the sociological level, they also look for ways of crafting work in these new, smaller communities, right? So it's like kind of communities of practice for these performers, and so from this study of these over 20 performers, what we want to do actually is showcase their work, but also to really investigate what the ins and outs of an actual performance process looks like. So we wanted to basically look at a real performers with this distance technology, and in our case using a robotics that's kind of remotely like interaction remotely, to really see in a hands-on case what this kind of distance performance feels like for these performers in one particular case. So this is the performer that we engage in. Her name is Mizuho. So she's performing in New York, and then the robot is actually sitting here in Hong Kong, basically. And they have an interaction. The whole rehearsal is taking place online, and then the performance is also taking place online. So the rehearsal is very interesting, by the way. This is a lot of the finding is from that. And so this is how this system looks like. So everything's on Zoom. She can see the robot, but only from one point of view. Actually, it's kind of like on the side, looking to the robot on the side. And so it's kind of a different place where the audience would be looking, which is straight on at the robot. So the interactions that she has, basically, we created that into a story. So this is the story that we rehearsed. So the robot meets the dancer, the robot imitates the dancer, and then the dancer is kind of fed up that the robot cannot really imitate her well. So she leaves the stage, and then with audience encouragement, the robot kind of gets better and better. And then eventually the robot asks the human dance, and then they dance together. I'll show you kind of what the video looks like in a little bit. And then the robot gets good, better and better. At some point, the robot basically starts ignoring the demands of the dancer. So our kind of narrative is also telling this human technology interaction. But of course, the story is told through this rehearsal process. Working with this dancer in New York and the robot that's sitting in Hong Kong. And by the end of this performance, actually, the robot is kind of shut down by the dancer, because the dancer realized she cannot really get the robot to do what she wants to tell in this narrative, basically. So that's kind of how the system shuts down at the end of the show. So I'll just give you a quick view of what that looks like. Yeah, so this is what it feels like. This is what the performance feels like. And then now I'll tell you about kind of what we learned from this whole process, right? One thing that we found is that the dancer basically has to imagine what the audience sees, right? Like, because there's a live audience seeing this stage show as well, so they're kind of connected remotely. And basically, she has to kind of improvise, in a sense, because she doesn't really understand like exactly what every movement would lead to, right? So there's a whole kind of a dialogue that we let her know, remember, in this process, where she sees what the robot's doing, and then she's supposed to do that as well, right? So even though the actual show, the robot imitates the dancer, but actually in reality the dancer is sort of imitating the robot in some sense, because the robot is basically programmed, right? So that the staff just basically presses a button. So she has a kind of, as she says, like hard time feeling the robot because there's a distance and the delay. So this delay that we talked about before is the same as communication with humans. We need to build up our relationship. So because of the limited perspective, and really the limited perspective of us with each other, with other performers, this captures this kind of relationship that's at a distance. And so she also kind of interestingly said that the rehearsal is like brain work over physical work. So this is the part that I think you can look into the paper for more details, because there are a lot more findings based on this idea. But she can imagine the robot, right? Because first of all, the robot is it's not bipedal. They don't have like arms and legs. And also the robot cannot move. So she treats the robot as sort of this humanoid figure without the robot actually exhibiting those features. But as you see, that humans are really good at reading this in the robot, right? In any kind of moving form, basically. So it's almost like dancing with a partner that doesn't look like her and move like her. And she also mentions that when the robot movements imitates my moves or shown to me, I began to learn from the robot movements what other things I can do with my body. So because the robot is different, she kind of sees the kind of different things she could do as well. So use that as a way to improvise differently based on that. So in the show, actually, she repeats the same song twice. So she has to dance one of those choreographies twice. And oftentimes in the second choreography, she's influenced by the robot is kind of what she's seeing from the robot to actually dance differently to the same song, even though she could have danced exactly the same way. So I just want to also tell you that this idea is actually developed into another exhibition performance strategy, in which the classical stage is further manipulated. So in this work, what we did is actually to use a way for the audience to control this remote homes of these performers, right, using the IoT basically. So this is actually published soon also at ACM Multimedia, so you can also check out that work. And finally, I just want to thank folks in our lab. So this is could not have been done with the wonderful grad students here. So we're the Studio for Narrative Spaces, and you can check our Instagram. It's just called Studio for Narrative Spaces, and also our website. And finally, we want to thank our funding agencies as well, especially the Hong Kong Arts Development Council, where this work was funded. So, okay, thank you very much.